everyone, and welcome back to the Bone Club. I'm here with, as always, our best friend Stephanie,
Hey
and
everyone.
and this time we have as our special guest Tebah Browne from the Innocence Project, who I had the fantastic opportunity to interview at last year's AAFS meeting, American Academy of Forensic Science meeting in Baltimore. Welcome, Tebah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
if you want to give us a little bit of your background, yeah, just like what got you into the forensic science world and a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much. So I am currently working at the Innocence Project. I am the forensic science policy specialist. Prior to that, I was working as a DNA analyst. And prior to that, I was more on the research side. So I got into forensic science, I think the very traditional way. So I got my bachelor's and master's in forensic science. And I recently graduated last year with my PhD in forensic science from Oklahoma State University. So I think I just always knew that I wanted to do something forensic science related. I think the what specifically I'm doing right now is something that like was unknown to me. So I'm less focused on the laboratory side of things and more focused on the policy side of things.
I will say the interview and even the run up to that with you and Marvin last year opened my eyes as well to the policy side. I had written a few papers, but I had always been on I want to do research, research, teach. But hearing you and especially Marvin Anderson, who, if you all can find something from him speaking about his experiences, please do. Um, Listening to the role of the Innocence Project and the problem with the false arrests, false convictions in this country,
I say
that
before we get too
opened my eyes.
yeah, before we get too far, just for our audience, in case they don't know, do you mind giving us a elevator
Yeah,
pitch style of what the Innocence Project is?
Sure. So the Innocence Project is a non-for-profit organization that works to free wrongfully convicted individuals, as well as prevent future wrongful convictions from moving forward. And we try to do this by creating fair, compassionate, and equitable systems of justice for everyone. We try to ground our work specifically in science, maintaining scientific integrity, and also anti-racism.
Thanks.
uh, yes. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Um, and with that, you said that you were the scientific advisor, um, and you work on you're the policy advisor. What specifically what is a policy advisor? What is the scientific policy advisor's function?
So I'm the policy specialist,
Mhm.
but
Or
same thing.
specialist?
Yes. So in my role, I assist with all of our policy work that relates to science and the use of it in criminal investigations and the court system. So any policy, any bill, any law that has to do with for the way that science is utilized by attorneys, judges, and so on, I work on those bills. For example, we worked in Maryland on the forensic genetic genealogy bill, which focused on ensuring that there was some type of regulation around the use of that technology because, it's been the Wild Wild West. So bills that are specifically like that. We also focus our efforts on creating some type of oversight or advisory mechanisms for different states. So, and that could be done through like forensic science boards, right? So there we were part of creating the Forensic Science Commission in New York, as well as the Forensic Science Commission in Michigan, or rather, Forensic Science Task Force in Michigan, the commission in Texas, and so on. So anything that has to do with like enforcing or trying to enforce some type of regulation, is where where I step in. So we work on so we're based in the United States. We work on the state and the federal level. So we work a lot. We go to the Hill and lobby a lot, speak with different policymakers on different bills. And yeah, and just try to make sure that the methods that are being utilized are grounded in reliable and accurate science, that laboratories are properly validating all of their methods. Basically, the goal is to ensure that forensic science is reliable and valid so that it doesn't ultimately lead someone to being wrongfully convicted.
I'd say my master's thesis was about reliability and cognitive bias and those types of things. And so I guess I'm curious that for the anthro world, uh, we're only just now kind of dipping our toes into the bias side of things, where like we've been trying to do validity and reliability studies and inter-observer studies for a long time, but only just, within the last decade or so, kind of dipping our toes into those like bias things that have been written in the Daubert standards since 2009, but haven't really been delved into, I guess. Uh, do you find that in your work, that people understand what those things are, or do you feel like you have to always try to explain what the differences between reliability, validity, bias, etc. kind of are?
Um, Definitely for the policymakers, they usually don't have any type of science background. So it's, explaining very simple things to them so that they have that proper education. In terms of, other stakeholders that we may work with, usually if it's someone that is in opposition, right? So perhaps they aren't on board with whatever policy we're trying to push, then that requires like perhaps explaining why there needs to be a focus on how bias affects the forensic scientist decision making, or what's the difference between ensuring something is reliable and making sure that it's properly validated. Just make providing that education for them in case that there is a disconnect so they can see the bigger picture.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I guess, in your background, I know you kind of had started in more the DNA world. Um, did you take classes in scientific communication, like those types of things? Because I feel like that's one thing I've always been trying to do better about of I understand my science, at least I hope I do. But then like trying to explain it to people who know nothing about what I do. And I feel like as someone who's working with people outside of the forensic field or the science field in general, you have to be a really good science communicator. I guess my question is, did you take any classes on how to do that? Do you have any tips and tricks for people? That kind of thing.
No, I didn't take any classes. I think my science communication skills started to improve when for a while, I was a in-house consultant for a defense organization. So I found myself just, if when you, I guess the closest thing to it is when I did my master's, we had to do like a mock trial. And in there, they teach you make sure you don't use heavy jargon, make sure that like you stick to the basics or you explain things if you get more technical. So I guess that kind of helped. And then when I started working for defense, I think I realized that, oh, I need to make sure that I'm not being technical. Because if I am too technical, no one's going to understand or remember anything I say. So it's just like ensuring that using a lot of metaphors, right? That tends to be very helpful. So if you have like I think I once heard this metaphor, like someone was trying to explain what DNA markers are, right? And they like they like compared it to a city. So they're like in a city, there are different types of like people that have unique characteristics, right? So just like using metaphors or trying to create some type of imagery to assist with their understanding of, what they may consider more complex concepts.
Um,
Makes sense.
when you you work with policy um, creators,
Mhm.
policymakers, and I many years ago, I was involved in lobbying. It's very small scale lobbying, and one of the things that I had learned as a baby lobbyist is that relationships were key.
Mhm.
Now with 50 state legislatures plus the DC Council, plus I'm assuming the territories and the US Congress, that's an awful lot of relationships to cultivate.
Mhm.
How does the Innocence Project and how does the office you work with go about doing that? Do you have sort of local offices? Are there people within throughout the states that you know who to go to and who can do those local communications for you? Or
Yeah, so we have an innocence network, and that's composed of different organizations from different states that do innocence work. So if there is an innocence organization in a particular state, we always partner with them because they are our eyes and ears, and they can, go to their Capitol Hill and get the work done faster, right? So we make sure that we're partnering with these organizations as well as for some states, specifically if it's a state that we feel is like going to be very busy. We also have a lobbyist, like a dedicated lobbyist for that particular state as well to help us with our work. I think that I think there's like an innocence organization in almost all states.
do you work in the territories as well, like Puerto Rico and um, Virgin Islands, or is it just because they're, I guess, law systems are a little different, or they're under a federal system, they're a little bit different? Um,
So I haven't done any work in Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands. I wish, but there is an innocence organization in Puerto Rico. It was recently developed, so hopefully in the future.
I guess I don't know if you particularly work in that area because I'm sure the Innocence Project is a large group, but like if a case was brought like to the Innocence Project, how is that decided? Like, do you take all cases? Feels like that can't be possible, but like, I guess, do you know how cases are chosen and what are kind of the criteria that make it fall under something that the Innocence Project would take hold of?
Yeah, and I'm speaking for just us, the Innocence Project in New York, and not all of, I think the other innocence organization may have different requirements or look for different things. But um, when we're when we are trying to decide whether or not we should take a case, there are like key elements that we're looking for, right? So the person must claim actual innocence and not legal innocence. So actual innocence meaning that they actually believe that they are innocent, right? Compared to legal innocence, where there might be other evidence to suggest that or other evidence to overturn their case with what happened in Massachusetts with the drug scandals that happened where they had to overturn 1,000 or so cases. We don't work on those type of cases because they're not actual innocence cases, even though eventually those people were exonerated, but it wasn't because of they thought they were innocent, but rather an error. We also try to see if there's any type of biological evidence involved in that case. So we primarily only take cases that we can do DNA testing. And we then utilize the DNA results in order to determine whether or not the person is, you know, especially we try to like identify probative evidence, something that may stem from the actual perpetrator to try to exclude our client from that. And then so it's actually interesting. I think every year our acceptance rate is 1%, right? So we are not accepting a lot of cases, and we do tend to have very strict criterias. And we also do currently have a backlog, but those are technically like the main characteristics that we look for when we're trying to determine whether or not we should take up a case.
As a scientist, putting your science hat back on, um, when you look at these cases, what is that role that science plays when it comes to these wrongful convictions? And conversely, how can that same science be used to exonerate individuals? Or is it this science we now take and put in bad category, and we now input new good category?
Okay, so I think science plays multiple different roles, right? So we tend to categorize everything as like the misapplication of forensic science, but that means many different things. So we've seen in a lot of our cases where the use of a scientific method that wasn't properly validated or doesn't have a strong scientific foundation, those type of methods have led to wrongful convictions, right? For example, biomarker analysis. Um, and there's also another category where even though the method is accurate, right? However, the interpretation of the results or the way the certainty that was associated with the results was inaccurate, right? So, for example, serology, before DNA testing became a thing, right? We used to utilize serology and do blood testing, or blood typing rather. And the obviously blood typing isn't as discriminative as DNA testing, but it was deemed so, right? Where they could say, oh, this person has a type O, it must be them. But we know that, that isn't a very discriminative DNA, oh, that's not a discriminative marker, right? And that could falsely implicate a lot of people. So those type of things where it's like claiming that there's 100% certainty when there really isn't. Another place where we saw that is with microscopic hair analysis, where they were conjuring up unfounded statistics and claiming that they're 100% certain that this hair came from this individual. And we know that like that was completely unfounded. There's no, they didn't do any type of proper statistical analysis to actually determine, what the actual frequency of, those different characteristics that they're looking at is. And then the last category would be just when forensic scientists would just provide false statements, right? Or kind of or manipulate evidence, right? Or do some type of manipulation. So basically, some type of malpractice associated with the forensic analysis. I recently, one of our most recently exonerated clients, his name is Leonard Mark. He, well, in his case, the forensic scientists like falsely stated that something was possible when, there's clear evidence that this could never happen, right? But back then that science did not exist, right? So they that's what they utilized to and then it led to his wrongful conviction. So those are the three different categories, right? So they're completely using something that's completely invalid and not scientifically reliable. They're overstating their certainty or overstating the value of a scientific method, or it's just malpractice, or doing something that is just like professional negligence, right? Those have been those are what fall within the misapplication of forensic science. And when it comes to the subcategory of just like completely unreliable, we do not utilize methods that we have deemed as unreliable, or what my coworkers would call junk science, but I personally don't like the term junk science. We don't utilize that at all, right? So if someone would suggest, well, why don't we get another scientist to replicate this? That's not something we're going to do, right? So when it comes to those type of cases, the best path would be to attack the scientific foundation of that particular method, because ultimately the foundation is weak and there are a lot of flaws associated with it. When it comes to the other category where it's just like they're the other subcategory where it's like an overstatement of the value of the method. We've so when it In terms of like our serology cases, we combat that by doing DNA analysis, right? Because if they did serology, that means biological evidence was available or is available. So we utilize other scientific methods to basically find other type of evidence that we could use to support our client's claim and prove their innocence. And then I think it's the same with the last category too, right? Where if usually if a forensic scientist like goes on stand and like completely states something that's inaccurate, there is no repercussion for that and nothing really happens to them. So we just, try to get other experts that could basically state or show that whatever this person said was inaccurate, and something that could never happen, and so on. So we definitely do, like, there are specific forensic methods that have led to wrongful convictions, but we also utilize forensic to try to, usually DNA analysis, to try to, um, combat or try to generate evidence in support for our clients.
In that same vein, though, as new methodologies, because new methodologies and new techniques are coming online quite frequently, are you able to apply them to cases that, innocence cases from past? And I'm thinking, and you may not know the case, I'm thinking of one locally here, the West Memphis Three, where they are now applying a new DNA extraction technique and analysis technique in the case. But the case itself is from the 90s, so the technique didn't exist in the 90s. So can you do that, or do you do that?
Sorry, someone was calling me.
It's okay.
Yes, we also do that. I think, and especially if it's a case where some type of forensic analysis or some type of DNA analysis was already done to begin with, we will try to, because we know that DNA technology is advancing every day, right? So we will try to use more advanced technology, especially if the original results are it showed that the sample was low quality or it had some type of issue, we'll try to use a more sensitive method. And there's a specific type of policy that we're trying to enforce in different states. It's called change in science, which basically states that if there is a clear change in the scientific method, meaning that perhaps the general consensus or the general acceptance of that method has changed, or there's new, more reliable methods that can be used, then someone can open up their case again and try to get post-conviction forensic testing. So using that mechanism, we do take advantage of new technology.
So on the policy side, I know you were saying that you talk a lot with like lawmakers and things like that. Um, do you also do the scientific communication back the other way for like when a policy does get put through and standards get put out, I guess, do y'all also like reach out to local law enforcement to say like, here's the update and this is why it's changed? And if it has to do with a particular method of like, this isn't actually a reliable method anymore, like putting those things out? Or do you find that those types of policies are already understood by the scientific community that it affects, and that's why it got pushed forward? Or I guess went to the conference that I went to this past February. Um, Someone was talking about how they interviewed some law enforcement, and it was about NAGPRA guidance, but they realized that their local law enforcement didn't actually know the updated guidance because the guidance had changed slightly and who needed to be contact changed. And they just like, because they were busy and didn't read the laws, as I know I'm probably in that category as well. Like, how would, how do the scientists then learn what is the new standard, new policy, I guess?
Yeah, when it comes to the whole bill passing process, I think law enforcement, if it's something that affects them, they're quite involved. And if it passes, that usually means that it's something that they're not against. Um, they tend to be our biggest opposition with some of our efforts. So if something does pass, it's because like they were on board, and usually we have to work to get them on board and work with them to, you know, you know, just come to a middle place, right? So there's some type of agreement there. In terms of implementation, we usually don't focus on implementing whatever policy was passed, which is something that we're considering like being more focused and active on, because I think implementation is a very key component. Um, we think just because a bill is passed, that means that everyone's going to follow it, it's going to be enforced, but there's some bills lack an enforcement mechanism, right? Or perhaps the in the organization or department that it was designated to, they currently don't have the capacity to properly enforce that bill. I'm thinking of the Death in Custody Reporting Act of I'm trying to remember the year. I think it's 2003, but I could be off. But the Death Reporting Act, where basically that is, they have a provision where the Department of Justice basically um, correction facilities and detention facilities are required to report when when a death occurred within their facility, or generally when an individual is within custody of law enforcement, they have to, and they pass, they have to report that, right? But that is something that hasn't been properly enforced. And this is something that's required for all states and all territories, but it hasn't been properly enforced. And the Department of Justice is in charge of enforcing it, but they've been complaining that they don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to properly enforce this, right? So just because something is passed into law doesn't mean that, it's properly enforced. So implementation is definitely something we're trying to pay more attention to.
Well, I think you and Stephanie bring up a good point there. I wonder, not just with enforcement and implementation with law enforcement, but just even getting the word out. You have changes in law and policy, and rules, regulations, both on a federal level and on state level that come out. And how does that get translated down to the individual bench scientist, the individual law enforcement officer, that beat cop, that beat sheriff's officer, the beat corrections officer, firefighter, EMT, whomever. And for standards, particularly in forensic science, we know we get blasted with the emails. Hey, the standard has changed. But with law, unless you're looking, how often does it get told, oh, by the way, law changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How many of us, that work in the anthropological and archaeological fields, unless we were looking and read the papers, we're actually told, by the way, NAGPRA regulations updated.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I'm very fortunate in that we have like a quality assurance team that they know all the stuff and they just tell us what to do, which is really nice. But yeah, for smaller sheriff's offices or smaller police departments or other
Smaller
forensics,
MA's offices.
yeah, like they might not have all of those. They might have not have the people to be able to know that kind of thing. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting area that I'm glad it's getting talked about at least because policy is great, obviously, and you can't enforce anything if there's not something to enforce, but it's hard if people don't know, that's also hard. But
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Along that, with policy and with the ever-changing science, we do have a new science or factor of science that is here to stay with us. Stephanie knows what I'm going to talk about. Um, what is the what do you see? What does the Innocence Project see as the ever-changing role of artificial intelligence and both the forensic science you deal in and with the cases you work with, now that it's in our science?
Yeah, so that is something that we've been grappling with a lot too, right? Trying to see um, if these technologies could improve, the system, or what harms could they place into the systems, right? So, we've been dealing with a lot of predictive policing technology, facial recognition that has led to many wrongful arrests, right? And a wrongful arrest is just one step closer to a wrongful conviction, right? So just seeing what technology is being introduced and how are they being utilized, and are there cases where these technologies have led to some type of wrongful arrest or something like that. We're also, trying to understand the role that artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, could have in falsely implicating individuals, right? So we've been thinking about how deep fakes could be utilized to falsely implicate an individual, or maybe utilized by a corrupted cop to, create or generate false evidence against someone to try to get them to confess. Which, false confessions is like the one of the number one contributor of wrongful convictions. So we're trying to see what role that could have, right, in terms of our deception work. We obviously believe that, law enforcement, other than trying to detect deepfakes, there isn't a need for them to utilize that type of technology, right? And we're also trying to see if we could use trustworthy AI to assist us with our case flow. As I stated before, we do have a backlog. So to see if we could create a private, secure, and reliable system that can help us analyze our case files, or interpret the cases that we have and see if there are any associated trends or if specific things that we should look for. So we are like trying to see how can is AI something that could lead to further wrongful convictions, right? Because we don't really see a difference between AI and the more traditional sciences, right? And then how can AI be utilized to help with caseload? And one more thing I'm gonna say is we're starting to see that, in the forensic science community, there are certain methods where we may say that, well, this is something that's more subjective, something that is prone to human error. And we've been hearing an argument being made for AI that it could replace um, um, it could to automate this method to try to make it more objective, or make it less prone to human error. But there is a understanding that AI in itself, right, does have issues and it is prone to biases, right? It is being created by a human, right? And their biases can be integrated into the systems as well. So just having a full understanding of how AI is being utilized and making sure that we are properly informed and, you know, we, are able to, you know, challenge wrongful convictions that may happen in the future.
So to
Oh,
put you on this real quick, just sorry, to put you on the spot with both sides, the good and the bad of that,
Mhm.
you have a bench scientist slash prompt engineer. They have done their analyses, they have put in the results of their analyses in the prompt, and they have the prompt generate their final report.
Mhm.
Is that worthy or not worthy?
I think with that, they have to, even though the system generated the final report, there has to be a human reviewer, right? So the human should still be um, encouraged or required to review everything that the AI system has generated to make sure that there is no error, there is no any like nothing was hallucinated, and everything was accurate and true.
I say kind of going along what we've just been talking about, but skirting a little with changes in law, the last four-ish years. Um, Not quite two-ish. I feels like four. Um, where being able to say certain things in the science world isn't really allowed anymore, I guess. Where like I'm thinking especially with like grant writing and stuff where we can't do science that says bias. We can't do science that says feminism. Can't do science that says whatever. Do you find that in the Innocence Project world, when you're trying to put forth policies, you also have those same types of constraints of like being able to you have to like change your wording to mean essentially the same thing, but not have those like ticket items that lawmakers and upper ups don't like in this current world?
Um, I do think there is a lot of wordplay, yeah. Um, where we have to make sure if there's like a specific provision that we want, but it may be a trigger, right? We definitely have to make sure that we tailor it to a specific audience to ensure that they don't get triggered by it. Yeah, I think that's just like policymaking in general, where you have to do a lot of word playing or wordsmithing, whatever. So yeah, I think that's just the general process.
Cool, thank you. It's something I think about a lot because my thesis was about cognitive bias. Sorry, I don't know if y'all can hear that. My phone is beeping a lot. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, because my thesis was about, yeah, cognitive bias and things like that. And I was fortunate that I finished and published before a lot of that was put in place. And so it's like, if I wanted to like go get my PhD and continue the research that I was doing, I'll have to be similar to y'all, very good at that wordsmithing to say what I want to say without saying it, but also still saying it. And like, yeah, it's just an interesting word.
Yeah.
So, um, real quick, when you go through and you research the science that is out there, and you're trying to say, okay, this particular methodology is problematic. How do you go about determining that? Is it um, just a sort of cross-validation peer review of that science? Is it a review of the literature itself? How do you and the Innocence Project, or just how do you all go through this process of trying to determine, okay, this methodology is not the best and is causing issues?
Yeah, so it's the review of the literature. So we try to see if it's based on a strong scientific foundation, right? Which is basically determining, okay, what are the claims of the specific methods, and is there peer review journal articles supporting these claims, independent um, individuals that are also coming to these same conclusions, right? And usually we find that for some of these methods that have been discredited, that wasn't the case, right? It's usually a method that was created by one individual and it was never independently validated or verified, and they were like the sole proponents of it, right? So by looking to see if there's other supporting literature on this method, or if there's literature that challenges this method, is a key component of our work.
Do
For,
you, oh, go ahead, Stephanie.
I guess, kind of with that, is it y'all like constantly go through literature all the time and push policy that way? Or is it more like, I guess, it's a chicken or the egg question of like, is it you've noticed certain things in y'all's cases have consistently been wrong, so you dive into the literature about those things? Or are you kind of, you have a team that's spread their tendrils far and wide to all areas of science and are creating policy before you get a case that has a problem with that science, I guess is my question.
Okay. So I think it could be a little bit of both, right? So if we are if we are encountering a lot of cases where there's a particular method that has led to the wrongful conviction of an individual, we will, or multiple individuals rather, we will I think we'll try to collaborate um, with individuals within academia or at research institutions to for them to independently look into this and see if they can, you know, confirm what our thoughts are on this method, right? And this is something that is like they're independent, they're free to come to whatever conclusions that they, are able to come to based on their analysis. We also try to collaborate a lot with, different, like with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We were one of the bigger they're the biggest proponents for their scientific foundation reviews that they do, where basically they look at the what I was stating at the basic at the claims of a specific method and see if there's research available to either confirm or discredit the method, right? So we were the ones that were, key proponents of them doing that type of work. And it's been really helpful for our work as well.
Do you work with also with like the OSAC and ASB bodies?
Yeah, so I'm a member of ASB. I'm a member of the DNA consensus and the secretary.
I guess we're coming up on an hour, so I figure ask one or two more questions before we close up. Uh, if for our audience they're feel compelled and drawn to the Innocence Project, I guess do you have any advice as to like what type of experience someone should have before trying to move into that realm, or any advice on how to manage the emotions that come up with taking cases and, seeing all of what science can do wrong, I guess.
I don't think a particular expertise is needed necessarily, or like a specific degree is needed. I think if you're someone that already has a forensic science background, you could always like reach out, volunteer, try to assist or be vocal about a specific case. Um, we take volunteers all the time, right? We have people reaching out to us like, I'm a forensic scientist and I value the work of the Innocence Project, or I'm a student and I want to see. We also have internships too, and I want to get involved. Are there opportunities for me? So I think if there's a desire, right, and you have some type of a forensic background, there's definitely a place for you at the Innocence Project.
And to
Yeah.
wrap up, just to wrap up, I think on a high note, do you know how many people has the Innocence Project exonerated? And if you're willing to share, I don't know if you have, how many of those have been on death row?
I know that we've worked to exonerate more than 250 individuals. I don't know the number for death row, um, but yeah, I'm sure it's a lot, but the number is escaping me right now. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I just actually pulled up the your Innocence Project website, and it says in 2024 was the 250th victory. So that's at least 250 as of 2024, so 2 years ago. So I'm sure there's,
Yeah, it's more than
a couple
250.
more
Mhm.
since then, but that's just it's both for me, it's like crazy because it's like that's so awesome, but then it's also like, oh my God, 250 times that science got it wrong. Like, but it's awesome that that's also 250 people that now have their lives back and aren't, sitting in prison or on death row or whatever. Just the work y'all do is amazing. Yeah, I mean, just
Thank you so much. And that is actually just the number for our Innocence Project, right? I think the number of exonerations in total is more than 1,000.
Wow, that's awesome. It's
That is
it's one of those things,
phenomenal.
yeah, where I think a lot of people who, get into forensic science, they like the science and they enjoy the forensics, but they want to do good work. They want to help both sides to a certain extent, but they would never, hopefully, an ethical scientist would never want their science to be used to incorrectly
Yes.
uh convict someone. And so it's nice that there is an organization that is constantly looking and trying to do better so that it's not all on the individuals that are victimized by the science and the world and all of those types of things. So it's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
I say, Ashley, do you have any last
No,
standing questions before we close up?
that's it for us. Dr. Browne, I want to thank you so very much for joining us this evening. It has been a real treat for me, and I'm sure it's been a real treat for our listeners this week. So,
For sure. Yes. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And it's good to know that y'all take volunteers. It's one of those things that like I definitely have watched the Netflix documentary, so I feel like I know what I'm doing. No, I'm kidding. Uh, but it's always so fascinating to see science do right. And so I'm just in awe. So I
it is
appreciate
a
it.
fascinating Netflix documentary.
It is. It is a good show, but so is Bones, and Bones is not realistic at all. So,
Bones belongs in the trash.
but yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or anything like that, are you willing to give us maybe your email or something that we can put out with the podcast? Um, that way, if they want to reach out to you specifically or whatever.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll put that kind of in the description for the audience if y'all have any questions. Don't bombard her. She's got good work to do. But but if you had any questions, yeah, I'll let Ashley kind of take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next month. If you have any ideas or any suggestions as to who we should interview next, by all means, please hit us up on all the socials. You know where they are. Bone Club Podcast, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.